Hey everybody, it's Norm from Tested, and what you see here is the new Hot Toys Mandalorian figure just released in time for the upcoming season 3 of The Mandalorian. This is Mando as he appears at the end of season 2, and this latest figure not only includes an amazing Pedro Pascal head sculpt, but I think its shining feature is its chrome Beskar armor. The armor is so brilliant and shiny in this figure. It's 6th scale, 12 inches tall, comes with a ton of accessories, including his spear, the Darksaber, and even a baby Grogu, all of which I think is going to make a pretty amazing display and diorama build. So that's today's project, a diorama build for Mando as you see him in the season 2 finale, rescuing Grogu from Moff Gideon. So the first step to this project is going to be a sketch. This helps me solve some of the early logistical problems of scale and ideation and just the scope of how many things I'm going to have to design and fabricate for a diorama. For a diorama, I know at bare minimum it's going to be a base platform and some type of backing boards. And it can really be as complicated as I want. I can do 4, 5, 6 sides, really make it more of a display case. But here I want something that's more like a cross section. And if you look at the episode where Mando is fighting Moff Gideon at the end of season 2, he's fighting down this long corridor that has a really interesting take on like Imperial wall paneling on the side with these nice illuminated pillars that kind of frame the different sections of that corridor. I'm not going to make that entire corridor, that'd be way too big for 1/6 scale, but if I create a cross section of that, I can maybe have something that includes one of those illuminated pillars plus a few of these section panelings, wall panels behind Mando. Something I can use to create a nice illuminated backdrop and have some dimensionality so it can be like peeking around a corner or something. I can do a pretty good dynamic pose. So knowing the scale of this project is going to be really important. Yes, 1/6 scale, but what does that mean when I'm trying to create some type of environment? My constraints are going to be the material. My Glowforge laser cutter cuts material basically up to 20 inches wide and not quite 12 inches tall, almost, if I use some Illustrator trickery. So I know that if Mando as a character is about 12 inches tall, will a wall behind him, should it be somewhere in the neighborhood of maybe 16 to 18 inches? I also know that I want to maximize the material, and so I want to keep these panels to one sheet of my pre-cut acrylic, which are 12 inches by 20 inches. So if I have a wall panel that's about 16 to 18 inches, it's going to be about 12 inches wide. And maybe I can fit 2 to 3 of these sections of paneling behind that. And then depth-wise, I also want to keep that pretty reasonable. So maybe around 4 to 6 inches or so. That gives me a good place to start. I'm going to head over to Illustrator and I'm going to start working on the design for this wall paneling, the flooring, and now to figure out the geometry for this pillar on the side with the illuminated panels. All right, we jump ahead a couple days now, and I've spent a little time working on the vector file for this diorama design. And based off my sketches, I knew I wanted a cross-section composed of 3 sections. So basically a back wall panel, which is this right here, a floorboard, and then the various pieces that make up that pillar with some holes cut out for potential illumination right here. I downloaded and imported in just an image of Mando and scaled him to 12 inches, so that gives me a sense of where his head is going to hit and match up to these wall panels. I knew my material is going to be 20 inches by 12 inches, and as you can see, I could only fit in 2 sections of the wall paneling, not 3, and even then the aspect ratios of things like these trapezoids don't exactly match up to what's seen in the show. I think what's important is going to be basically how this scales relative to Mando, and it's still looking approximately, in my mind's eye, what it would look like on the show, including these unique paneling here, which is directly taken from references I grabbed. And then the next step is to take these designs and divvy them up between the different materials. So something like this back wall panel doesn't get cut out of one sheet. This gets copied over into a document like this, where I've then marked the cut lines and some score lines, including cutting some holes here for potential wiring and upgrades, and then a second sheet where this is all the top panels that then get cut out and then will get glued on to the back panel. That happens a bunch of times, including for the base, including for all these different pieces here. We're gonna send this over to the Glowforge, do some laser cutting, and then get to the test fitting and assembly. The parts have been cut out, and I am in the tested studio now for some assembly. And I confess, some assembly has happened before off camera because I was really nervous about how the pieces would come together. So let's take a look at the components and what makes up this diorama. As I mentioned before, it's like a cross section of the hallway on that cruiser, for which there are 3 major components. There's a floor, of course, and I use a glossy black acrylic for that. I left the protective paper covering on that. I don't want to peel that until the very end. Something I learned from doing these builds is if I do that too early, which I'm always tempted to do, I'm gonna get fingerprints all over this, especially if I start gluing pieces together. It's a really easy way to mar up a glossy surface. But the design here, as I mentioned, was just a scaled up version of the 1/12 scale Death Star floor diorama. It's not exactly what was in The Mandalorian Season 2 on that cruiser, but I like the aesthetic of it so much, I want to use it as well. Something I also learned is that 1/8 inch thick acrylic, it's not a very sizable platform. Like if this was just the base sitting on a table, it's kind of flimsy, it's gonna be prone to breaking. So I really wanna add some thickness to it. And so I had some extra scrap pieces of 1/4 inch white acrylic, and I like that. I like the idea of stacking both 1/8 inch on top of 1/4 inch. So you have just a nice, thicker, more solid feel. And then I said, why not just add some plywood? So this is cut to size, and this ends up being my floor. So it's basically 1/2 inch plywood, almost a full inch thick as a base. That's very sturdy for 6th scale. The other benefit of doing 2 pieces of acrylic stacked on top is I'm gonna have extra depth for where my back pieces register. So I aligned, and you can see there are holes aligned here, and that's where, very importantly, this backing board is gonna slot into. So this is the most important piece I did, I think, off camera, which is 2 pieces of matte acrylic, 2 pieces thick, one which is the back, and then the relief work, which previously I'd done in like a Cricut cutter cut styrene, just wasn't thick enough. And so I went back to another sheet of matte acrylic for that relief work and for the paneling here, and it was nerve-wracking to individually then adhere each of these panel pieces precisely. So because I have the vector designs, what I did was create a scoring guide on the backing sheet to mark off where each of these pieces would then get adhered to. And I say adhere because I wasn't sure whether I was going to use glue or acrylic cement, a solvent. And I did some test pieces. The glue, way too messy. When CA glue, even if you're using different viscosities, if it spills over and it gets onto the surface of this matte acrylic, it's gonna ruin that finish. And the acrylic solvent, while a bit more, I have to work with it a bit more carefully because it really just welds 2 pieces together, it does evaporate. And even when I have some bits of it spill over, it kind of evaporates. It doesn't completely ruin that matte surface. And an extra benefit, the scoring of the guidelines kind of creates these really thin channels that act as a nice capillary effect to spread the solvent as well as protect it from spilling over. So just like one drop was all I needed to get each of these now welded on. And so they're firmly in place. And I love this thickness. The 1/8 inch thick panel work creates this nice shadow you can see. So that was the backing board. And this, we'll do a test fitting now. We'll go right here. I haven't glued my bottom pieces together yet, so I have to make sure the alignment is working. There it goes. It's gonna be eventually reinforced and glued together, but it even holds up on its own. And I'm really satisfied that even with this cut, the proportions worked out, where a 1/6 figure Mando here really works out to match the height of where the panels were on the screen grab. So having that reference piece in my Illustrator document as a way to scale up the wall was a smart thing to do. All right, so that's the back wall and the floor. The final piece, which is also very nerve-wracking to assemble, which is why I did it off camera, is this cross-section of a pillar. And this one, it's just piecing flat pieces of acrylic together was just a lot of careful work using a lot of 1, 2, 3 blocks to hold things together so they're perpendicular, using a mix of CA glues and acrylic solvent. And then I actually added some additional pieces to cover up places where I accidentally spilled some CA glue and did mar the surface. So some extra bit of decorative paneling to hide the crimes here. The lighting panels here, that's just extra cut pieces of the 1/4 inch white acrylic. That's gonna be my diffuser. I like that it's recessed here. And one of the lessons here again, adding extra paneling, whether it's the panels here, a panel here, or even some side panels here, the extra dimensionality really helps make this feel like a solid object, like something that works to scale. And this then gets slotted in here. Here's a moment of truth. Goes right in. There it goes. That's fundamentally the diorama. I can have Mando peeking out around the corner, Grogu behind him. Dimensionally, I'm very, very happy with this as a 6th scale piece, just as a display piece. But we're not done. So let's focus on some of the more interesting paneling work that I had to do and the problem solving that went with that. I'd done this type of construction before, but not this type of detailed paneling. And I knew at 1/6 scale, I would want to have this really resolve. Now, you can see it's gloss black. This trapezoid here has a few pieces of gloss black acrylic with some line work. And the issue I was coming up with is how to best show off that line work. I guess the easiest way to do it would be with a material like this. So you can find this online. Inventable sells it as well. This is 2-color acrylics, actually 2 different pieces of acrylic bonded together. It's white as a base, and the top has a color on it. It can be used for machining or laser cutting. And if you etch the top of this, comes with different colors, different combinations of colors, the top layer gets removed with any type of scoring or etching. And so once you refine your settings, you can actually get a 2-tone piece cut out and not have to do any type of painting. They have black on white, they have white on black, black on gold, green on gold, all different types of mixtures that you can find. And I just unfortunately had the red on white, which would be great for the center panel. And so here's an example of the center panel piece. And I just did some easy vector design work, created an etch as well as a score, and using very low power, high speed settings as to not melt the top layer too much, I was able to get very cleanly and clearly resolved this panel work. And then cut this out, and this would perfectly press fit into place right there. Look how clean that looks. Now, unfortunately, I didn't have black on white. I just had glossy black and didn't have time to order some, so I had to come up with another way. And so a kind of cheap and easy solution that I came up with that can work for you is you leave your covering, your masking, on your piece of material, and you basically use it as a paint mask. And so I cut out the panel lines and created some thickness to it. So if I use some tweezers, well, one, you could leave the masking on and that be your panel line, but this is not exactly white. It's a little charred from the laser cutting, so it'd be a little off-white. You can use tweezers and very carefully remove just the masking around where the panel lines are supposed to be, but leave the paper on everywhere else. And what you're left with is just the exposed panel, that outline that you want to have painted a certain color. Now you could mask off the sides and airbrush it, but even simpler way, use a whiteout pen. So here's a whiteout pen. Very carefully make sure I have it flowing. And just draw over that line. You could also hand paint this on. This is just a quick and easy method. And then once that dries, we peel off the mask over the rest of it. It's not as clean as doing it with the laser to etch on the two-tone acrylic, but in a pinch, this will work pretty well and pretty cost-effective too. Now we're going to move on to lighting. For lighting, I know I want to light 3 things in this diorama. I need lighting behind the pillar here, as it was seen in the show, and there's an extra piece, a panel here in the back wall that is also lit. And so behind the whole wall, I'm going to tape in some bright white, 6,000 Kelvin COB LED strips. 5 volts, 12 volts, either one should work. That should be an easy lighting job. I also wanted for this diorama to add some little bits of lighting on the panels as well. And I thought about this, came up with this after because I realized I had some lights that could work. So as opposed to using a solid panel, I've now cut out a panel with some holes in it. Some spaced out holes where you would see white and red light. And for these, I'm going to use these tiny micro LED lights. They have resistance built in. These run off of somewhere between 2.5 and 3 volts. And so you can use 2 AA batteries or even a cell battery will power one of these. And I have a pack of red ones and white ones that I'm going to then glue into the back and then wire up. So here's what I came up with. I think I'm pretty happy with this solution. I cut out 8 holes for these tiny micro LEDs, super glued them in the back of the panel, although I did tinker with the idea of wiring them through the hole and having them on the top, but it didn't look as good. I think in the back, lighting the inside of the hole is going to look better. And then I really didn't want to do a lot of soldering with this project. I wanted to do it quick and dirty. And I remember that Adam used copper tape to do his wiring for his blaster chest, his Louis Vuitton blaster chest build he did last year. And so that's what I've done here. I've taped in 2 strips of copper tape, one to wire up in parallel all of the positive leads and one for all of the grounds. I've cut the micro LED leads to length, and then just tape them with another piece of copper tape in place as opposed to soldering each of them. I could have soldered them, that's probably the right way to do it, but just tape all the positive, all the ground, and then I have 2 wires that are soldered to the back of it, and I will wire that up now to 2 AA batteries, and there we go. Red and white LED lights that become my lighting for my panel. And what I love about this is all the wiring is nice and self-contained behind the panel itself. It doesn't need to be adhered to any part of the back wall here, which means I could do this assembly modularly and do any repairs to it modularly as well, and install it now into the wall. Very happy. And here it is, a 1/6 scale diorama inspired by Moff Gideon's light cruiser from The Mandalorian Season 2, featuring Hot Toys' new Mando and Grogu figures. I hope you enjoyed this build. I'm Norm from Tested, and this is the way.